thanks to Windows on the World.
Bringing you cutting-edge news, empowering information, and no conspiracy theories on tonight's show. The recent 40th anniversary of squatters in Elgin Avenue, West London, brought up some very important issues on housing, the overinflation of house prices and social cleansing. Now house building is cheaper than ever, but prices, especially in London, are hugely overinflated. This impoverishes the population and puts them in perpetual slavery to banks. Piers Corbyn recalls what was so important about what happened 40 years ago and why it is so relevant today. This show is a follow-up to our recent show, How to Stop Social Cleansing, where Piers addressed a group of original squatters on the anniversary. Piers Corbyn takes us back to the original sites of the squats.
We're here today at the Six Ways Junction in Maida Hill, which marks the beginning of Elgin Avenue, Walterton Road, Fernhead Road, Harrow Road both ways, and the Great Western Road. And we're going to talk a bit about what actually held us together in practical, personal terms during the struggle of the Elgin Avenue and the area, which ended in 1975 when we were rehoused from Barricade. The important thing to understand was it was a community of struggle, and along with other squats, the Times were a theatre of possibilities. And we're going to look around some of these parts to see the different things that went on. But the important thing was that people helped each other, even though Elgin Avenue was a crazy place, a tumble-down place. For example, we had regular street meetings, we had a news sheet, we had an amazing squatters cafe, which would look at the space down the road, and we had people's courts. And these people's courts would resolve difficulties between people, including even expelling people from the street.
So, who would be elected as a judge? Would this be a community thing that somebody became a judge in?
It was a community thing. The street meeting would decide that it needed to hold a people's court and would have a people's court. So the meeting would decide. So there was no judge, no. I usually chaired the meetings, but it could easily be somebody else. And they would make sure it was properly done. And when we had these people's courts, it was about accusations of people stealing, or in one case, I remember somebody robbing lead from the roof of one of the squats. And, evidence was presented, defence was given, and the meeting decided. And in that case, I remember what happened. The guy was chucked out of the street for stealing lead from the roof.
People would be evicted if they stole off each other.
Yes. Although there was a lot of argument and it was tumbled down and a difficult place to live, the important thing was people supported each other, and we had regular systematic forms of organisation, so people could always relate to what was going on and knew how to be involved. We had regular open access squatting help sessions from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock every day. Anyone who wanted to squat could come there, and they'd be talk to each other. And squats could be opened for them, or they could be helped in opening squats. We had weekly streets meetings in the same place, where we talked about issues. We had a regular news sheet. The meetings on occasions would turn into the people's courts, where we discussed if there were problems and we'd enforce them. And astoundingly, the police would accept what we did. When we removed people, sometimes the police would turn up and say, look, what is going on? And we would say what went on, and the police would say, okay. Because actually they knew we were keeping order in some sense, although in the end, of course, they were against us.
The idea of forming a society, I think, is an interesting one, because the technical word for it would be a society, a group of people who are bound by certain rules, which they consent to. Yeah, so maybe it'd be good to expand on that as how that could be created. I mean, it's all about trust, isn't it? And trust is a word that's used by a lot of judges, and trust goes into trust law, but really trust means what it says, what we actually think it means, So I think it's really important. Common aims and trust.
Yes. Yeah, I think the essence of what held us together was a common purpose to get rehousing for everybody and support anyone who was homeless and turned up. And this was done in a political context, which I think bound people together in a kind of overarching common purpose, namely decent housing for all, getting support from tenants for fighting for better housing for everybody, and we had a concept of permanent expansion. We were always looking for more squats to move into, because that gave us strength. But we'd choose where to go depending on who was attacking us. And we had this slogan: if we were attacked or evicted in any area, we had 1 eviction, 2 squats. So if the GLC or Westminster Council evicted 1 building, we would squat 2. And they knew that. So we were always upping the stakes. We even squatted some high rent accommodation, as it was called, by the GLC down in Warwick Avenue, which is quite a coup because they were attacking us in Elgin Avenue. The emotional strength of the area was very important because although we were under constant threat, we actually lasted a long time, 72 to 75, before the street was finally evicted. But in the course of that, a lot of people would come in and think, this ain't going to last, and they'd go out. And then they'd come back. And I remember, and it's really a very moving case, 2 girls with children, single mothers looking after each other, and they used to go around together opening squats, and they always wanted somewhere better, you see. And they moved out of the avenue for a while, and they went to another place, and got moved on while we were still here. And eventually they came back, and they told me, as they came back down the street, they started crying because they knew that whatever had happened, whatever they'd done, they would be welcome. And they were welcome. And they incidentally stayed to the end when we built barricades in 1975, and they were involved in vigorously fighting for us. And of course, with people like that around, the GLC and the authorities have got a real problem, with angry women and children as well as angry men. They had to give in.
It's very interesting that, because you're forcing them into a situation where they have to do their statutory duty, which is to rehouse homeless people.
Yes.
It's a very interesting point.
Yes, that's right. I think now it's worth popping down the street, just look at some shots of a few places. Here we are now at the start of Elgin Avenue, and on this wall here, the same wall 40 years ago, we had a statement that we are Elgin Avenue squatters. How many of us were here? 200, and we're here to stay and fighting to force the GLC to rehouse us all. The building behind is number 1 Elgin Avenue, which was the release headquarters, which was a kind of legal advice centre to release people from jail or police custody. There was some kind of sort of magical properties and coincidences about it all, apart from this being a 6-ways junction, which is pretty unusual. I was born in Chippenham, Wiltshire, and when we started squatting here, I walked down the road and you find there's a road there called Chippenham Road. Okay, we're here outside numbers 3, 5 and 7 Elgin Avenue, which are not subject to the possession order later on, but number 3 was in fact squatted later on, and I was part of that later on. But number 7 was not a squat, but part of short life community housing, was a licensed thing, and was not subject to the possession order later, but formed an important part of the community and always was supportive, and was in fact occupied by the Hare Krishnas, where you could always get a meal. So if someone came down the street and were hungry, we'd send them there. They'd do a bit of chanting, and then they'd have rice. Here we're standing in front of these brick buildings, which are numbers 9 to 51 Elgin Avenue, which replaced the fantastic Victorian buildings that we lived in before. And these were the subject to the possession order and the eventual rehousing from the barricades in 1975. An important thing about how we were organised was because when we turned up in court and the houses were number 9 to 51, we had to make sure that number 9 was always a well organised place with people who could express what it was all about, because they'd be on first. And the name of the Court of Appeal case was where we won an important thing, was GLC versus Jenkins of numbers 9 to 51 Elgin Avenue, London West 9. And Jenkins was the name of an occupier of number 9 Elgin Avenue. We're here standing outside the famous number 19 Elgin Avenue, London West 9, where I lived from 1972 to 1975. This was our headquarters. This is where the streets meeting were held, where everybody came to find things out, and where we had a street notice board outside telling people instantly what was going on. And behind, you can see where the trees are, was numbers 23, 25 and 27 and so forth further down the street, which were some of them very dilapidated but fully occupied at the end. What we have behind us are the new blocks built to replace things, and we squatted a number of these on election day in 1981. And the police to this day do not understand how we did it without them seeing us. So I'm now going to tell you a bit about what we did. If you zoom up, you'll see these little balconies, right? Now, we gained entry to one flat on election day, 1981, and got onto the balcony. And from one balcony, you can get onto another. You climb round, but you can get onto another. And you can hide on these balconies. And the windows above the balconies have an air vent slit in them. And we were able, and I designed this system, to put through the air vent slit 2 fairy liquid bottles connected together with a coat hanger and ropes and slip knots, with which we could lower these cut-off fairy liquid bottles onto the handles of the windows, and you could pull through the air vent onto the handles and you could open the window. But if there's any coppers around watching now, that was it. One of the interesting things was we'd worked out a map, a 3-dimensional map of the building. So when we squatted into one, we could predict, we try and predict what number we were going to come out of when we opened the door at the stop. And we eventually got it right every time. A very important aspect of our community strength was the social life and the music. We had regular weekly pub music, and people were often playing music in the area. This is the famous Walterden Road, which is immediately adjacent to Elgin Avenue and part of the Maida Hills Squatters organisation. Walterden Road was the home of the 101ers from 101 Walterden Road. They became the Clash, which was a world famous squatters rock band. We're here standing opposite number 35 Great Western Road, which is now a new building, but then was a squat in an old Victorian building, and it was called That Tea Room, which is the Maida Hills Squatters Cafe. And it served up cheap food, a very large variety of teas, where the normal tea was called British Rail tea, and where you could take your work tokens when you did campaign work or roof repairs or barricade building. You'll get given these kind of squatters' money. You could go into that tea room and get a meal. This was owned by Westminster City Council, not the GLC, but they worked together and obviously wanted to destroy our community, so eventually did evict that cafe. And what they put there in its place for about 5 years was what they put there in its place for about 5 years was a advertising hoarding, and then later this building, which, you know, it just shows the mentality of these bureaucrats, because it was a fantastic place, that tea room. It held us together. Here we are outside number 35 Great Western Road, which was the squatters' cafe for Maida Hill, called That Tea Room, and it was started by Dave and Gail Goodall and a friend of theirs, Gina, and it was a truly fantastic community facility where you could go in and get a cup of tea, of course, and there was a big range, and British Rail tea was the name given to ordinary tea, and you could get a meal for low price. But if you went in and you'd work for an hour with a squatter's work token, where you had been building barricades or repairing a house or mending a roof, an hour work token would give you a meal. And this helped us move forward and stick together. They were an exemplary organisation.
Thanks for watching Windows on the World. Remember, keep watching those, watching us, watching Windows on the World, and we'll see you soon.